For the past 3 years, we've had the pleasure of bringing you behind the scenes of some of the borough's biggest stories, with in-depth discussions on the reporting process and how Staten Islanders are being impacted by the latest news. But as they say, all good things must come to an end.
We're evolving just like the industry's evolving, and we're just trying to figure it out. So a lot of this stuff, we've kind of nurtured through, and we've pivoted when we needed to pivot.
So, whether it's a podcast, a TV show, a radio show, whatever it may be, 3 years is a pretty good run. So I feel good about that, but I will be sad to let it go. Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance Multimedia Specialist and producer of the From the Scene podcast, Jason Paderon, to reflect on our experiences and discuss some of our favorite moments on the pod during what will be our final episode. Thanks for joining me today, Jason. How are you doing?
I think by the time this comes out, I might have a third child. So I think that has a lot to do with why we're choosing this time to end it, but exciting time. I plan on not having too much sleep in the very near future, so hopefully I can get this in there. But
yeah, well, thankfully you at least, I guess, have some experience from the first two kids. Yeah. So you've been here before, but obviously congratulations to you and your family, and I'm very excited for you. And we'll be sad to not have you here in the newsroom for a while, and we'll be missing out on a lot of content because, as anyone who knows you knows, you are always churning out a million different things and running all over the place to get things for different reporters. And so you will be missed, but I know that it will be valuable and important time with your family. So.
It'll probably kill me too. Every time I look at something on SI Live, I'm like, I wish I shot that.
Yeah, I could have done that. But, so as I said during the intro, this is going to be our last episode. And I'm not going to lie to you, I got a little bit emotional when I was kind of working on the
it's
outline.
like your baby.
Yeah, it is. This is something that I was one of the first people to start and had been really pushing for here for years. And I'll get into that whole process in a little bit, but I'm just kind of curious, what has your experience been like? I know you weren't here when we first started. I think you joined around episode 10, you said, but I mean, even then, you're here for the vast majority of it. So what has your experience been like throughout that time, and how are you feeling now that we are kind of wrapping things up here?
I recorded some podcasts on my own, various topics, and I had some experience. And when they brought me in, they were like, there's like kind of a natural fit to kind of work on the technical side of it, because it was running a lot of things I took and tried to make better. So I tried to make it like a more visual thing. I mean, we had the limitations, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
You basically got the message across during COVID, which is like the hardest time to really get anything. You want to start with that? Like just even getting it off the ground, like what was the logistics of it? Yeah, no. So it was something that, just for the listeners to know this, we started this podcast in 2021. It was still very much COVID restrictions, not quite a full lockdown, but there was not much going on in the way of like everyone was still masked. You had to have your vax card to go get dinner. You had all of these different things. Schools were in hybrid learning or fully remote learning. And so the world was kind of flipped on its head, as I'm sure many people remember. But me pushing for this podcast actually dates back even a few years before that. Podcasting is something that I had done in college and had always kind of been interested in. I had also done some radio work, some TV work, that kind of stuff. And so I love obviously I'm a reporter, right? So most of what I do is writing, but I also really like talking, and I like talking to people, and I think I'm decent at it. Hopefully, I don't know what you guys think. So I had been pushing for a long time, for probably since around 2018, 2019, me and our former colleague, Joe Ostapiuk, who is no longer here at the paper. Yeah, we don't speak of him anymore.
Yeah, we had tried to get him on, but we had some complications there. I really would have loved to bring him back, because he was really so instrumental in getting this thing off the ground and really helping me advocate for this and push for this in the newsroom. So he was such a crucial part of this in so many different ways. But so yeah, we had been pushing for it. We had actually gotten them to say, I guess it was early 2020, the editors were like, you know what, let's do it. I think this is a good idea. I think, it could be really cool, and we can expand out into different mediums and reach different audiences and maybe get younger people involved and all of this different stuff. And so they were in on it, and I was like, okay, let's start planning. We start figuring out what we're going to do. And then COVID happened, right?
Oh, so this was before COVID.
Yeah, this was pre-COVID. We had gotten it approved, and then COVID happened, and then obviously we couldn't do anything. And so no one could do anything. We're like, all right, this is going to have to go on the back burners, because every article we were writing was COVID this, COVID that, what's going on, when can I leave my house, where is there toilet paper for me to buy? So this got put back on the back burner, and then, it got to the point we were in the pandemic for, I guess, a full year at that point, essentially, because the first episode launched in April 2021. So it was pretty much a full year into the pandemic, and we're like, you know what? Let's get back to this. Things are slowing down a little bit. It could be cool, but there were so many different limitations as a result of it, and just the fact. Well,
but before you get to the limitations, what was your pitch? What did you want it to be? Obviously, you kind of have to pivot with COVID restrictions and stuff. What was your vision going in? Like, what was the premise?
Yeah, no, good idea. Good question. And basically, we were kind of emulating what the New York Times does with the Daily. Obviously, we were not doing it on a daily basis. We were doing it bi-weekly. But the idea was that people could read our articles and figure out what was going on, right? That is basically going to tell them what they need to know in terms of the actual news, right? But what we wanted to do is bring people kind of behind the curtain a little bit, get a little inside baseball, and show people what is reporting like, and how did we get this information, and who did we speak to, and where did we find this data, and all these different things to try and not only just give people more context and give people a better understanding of the news and the way that the process works, but also I think it was important to humanize our reporters and connect them with the audience and engage in a different way, because for so long we were just bylines on a screen, right? And no one really, obviously we had a couple people who do video. Everyone knows what Shane looks like. Everyone loves Shane.
But he's not allowed.
Right.
We'll get to that in a minute.
But there were so many of our other great reporters throughout the newsroom who never had that opportunity to get on a mic or to get in front of the camera and really explain to people who they are, what they do, how they do it. And I think that was like an equally important part of it to me, was to be able to showcase the people that we had here and humanize us in a time where reporters were not always viewed favorably in the eyes of the public, I guess, especially when we talk about former presidents. And I think it was good for us to be able to get out there. So we pitched it as that. And then, obviously there's a huge, you got to come up with the name, and then you have to get the name approved by legal because of trademarks, and then we have to develop a logo, and then we need to figure out distribution. So it took a long time to actually get things rolling. The funny thing is,
when I ended up taking it over, it was like kind of a collaborative piece, and then somehow the collaborations kind of left, and then I was left with like four different people's jobs, and I was like, oh, okay, I have everything. So,
yeah, well, you know what? At the beginning, it was me and Joe for the most part, and then it was me and you for the most part. So I wouldn't say that it might have been four people's worth of jobs, but I don't know that we ever actually had four people working.
You did have Rebecca doing it, because Rebecca.
Oh, that's true.
Rebecca was one of the first people. Like she gave me the outline, and she said, "This is what you do for the social side of it." And that was something that she
that's
did
true.
well.
Yeah, the social aspect was definitely true, and that's always been part of it. I think anyone who has a podcast realizes that, like, you can create the best content in the world, but if you're not distributing it and promoting it effectively, then there's going to be issues there. But so yeah, it took a long time to get going, and then once we did, like I said, and you mentioned earlier, it was in the middle of the pandemic. So if you go back and you listen and watch some of those early episodes, it's not the finest quality content. Hold on. Let me clarify that. I think that what we were talking about was great. Let's talk, but in terms of the quality of the audio and the quality of the video and all of this sort of stuff, we were essentially, everyone was still stuck in their homes. No one was back in an office yet. So I would get on a Teams call with whichever reporter I was having on that week. And we would, at first we were like, oh, let's just record the Teams call and use that audio. And we were like, oh no, this is really, really bad audio. Like, the quality is terrible. You could barely really make out what people are saying, and there was really no way to even fix it in post. So then we're like, okay, let's have people use voice memos on their iPhone, and
which was a good idea. That was ahead of its time. Who's that, Joe?
Yeah, that was Joe.
That sounded like a Joe idea.
Yeah, and so we did that, and so we would have people say, hey, okay, when you come on the podcast, we're going to record the Teams audio, but also if you could do a voice memo on your work phone and put it right next to you and leave that, and then you send us that audio and we'll use that, and we'll chop your audio with my audio and this audio and whatever. And so we were kind of doing a makeshift, figure it out as we go along sort of operation there. And again, it didn't make for the best content, but we got episodes out there, and it was cool. And I think that especially the first episode that we ever did, we had Kyle Lawson and Paul Iota, our courts reporter and City Hall reporter, come on to talk about emerging from COVID. And this was the Memorial Day parade. They got it off the ground. They got the permits approved. They let people march. And this was at a time where there were still so many restrictions on what you can do. So the idea was kind of this return to normalcy. And
right.
what was that like? And so I thought that it was a kind of natural place for us to start. This was the first big public event in the borough since the pandemic started last year. Can you just kind of set the scene for us a little bit? What stood out to you? What were some of the sights and sounds that you experienced when you first got there?
Well, it was a lot of the familiar sights and sounds of a parade, and I've covered a few of them on Staten Island. You know, the motorcycles, you know, Rolling Thunder Motorcycle Club, the beauty queens, the Boy Scouts, the kids with the miniature American flags, all those things that, like everything else in life, we kind of took for granted. It feels like. It was nice. It was nice. You know, it was a sense of normalcy, and that was the vibes I was getting from the people attending as well. You know, just saying that it was nice to be out, nice to see familiar faces.
It just kind of kept rolling from there.
Well, I mean, I know we referenced the pen clicking.
Oh,
sure, the infamous pen clicking.
I was going to spare Paul on that one, but that was there were definitely some hiccups early on in the process.
And it was always Paul.
It was
even like so early on. It was Paul clicking, and then it was Paul like with his audio. Like even later on, because Paul does like a turn. And
yeah. And well, so to fill people in, what we realized after recording the first episode is that during Paul's segment of the interview, you could hear him on his pen in his hand, and everyone has their own little nervous tics and all these different things. Yep. And then we found out, I guess this isn't necessarily chronological here, but then we had an issue here in the studio where we had someone who liked to bang on the table every time.
So we have signs.
If we're going to call out Paul, that was Charlie who was banging on the table. So we had to Jason put up a sign in the studio of please don't bang on the table, please silence your phone, please don't click your pen, that kind of stuff. So those are all like little things. And again, most of the people on the staff had never done a podcast before. So like I had some experience, you had some experience, but the reporters that we're bringing on, some of them were nervous, and they were, you know, like they had never been in front of cameras like that. They had never spoken into a mic like this. And so for them, like a quick little nervous tick, like it makes sense, right?
But I also think that, like, you know, because we're not trained for it, because we're, even if you had done voice work or things on social media before, if you're not practicing it, you kind of lose it. Yeah. And what I notice is, like, some people would read a script. They would literally have their answers typed out, and they're like, oh, and then other people take you by surprise. I mean, I even thought of, like, one of our most recent episodes.
The MTA liked to point to London as this kind of success of congestion pricing, but one thing that didn't get brought up often is that before London implemented their congestion pricing, they went out and they acquired, I think it was like 300 new buses, saying if we're going to start charging people to drive in, we need to have the infrastructure in place to make, like, to have an alternative for them. I think the MTA, the only thing that was offered to Staten Island, it was increased service during peak hours on 4 express routes. So it seemed to me a little bit of like kind of putting the carriage before the horse.
Mike was great, yeah, and that was his first time on the podcast.
I was like, have you ever recorded before? He's like, oh, I'm trying to think of some of the other natural Frank.
You have to ask questions, you have to develop sources, and over time, you know, it helps. But it's like anything else. It's like baseball too. Sometimes you learn a new thing. You can be doing this for 20 years, and something comes up you didn't know about it, and you learn something new.
Yeah, Frank was great too.
So sometimes you get those guys that you don't think, all of a sudden you put them in the recording studio and they're just phenomenal. So
yeah, absolutely. And so that was kind of where we started, where we made our bones, so to speak. And then we obviously had this major transition to the setup that you're seeing here now. So we had found out, as most people probably know at this point, the Advance used to be located on Fingerboard Road. 950 Fingerboard Road was there for years, decades probably, I would imagine. That office is no longer our office.
You worked, did you start there?
I did start there, yeah.
So I interned there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
so I started there. I've been at the paper almost 8 years now, which is a little scary. But so we started at 950 Fingerboard. Then we went, obviously, full remote during the pandemic. That's when we started the podcast. And then we never really went back to Fingerboard. They were like, we're opening a new office, actually. We're going to get this new office. And they said, hey, when we get this new office, they're building it for us from the ground up, essentially. Like, this was a blank space.
Right.
And so they said, okay, we're going to build you guys a podcast studio so you can use
That's what
this.
they said.
That's what they said.
And then
what did they mean, though, Jason?
What I walked into was, here's the room that is not acoustically sound. It's a giant square, and we have everything that reflects off of reflects sound everywhere. And here you go. Here's your podcast studio. And I thought to myself, I'm like, this is not conducive at all to audio.
So tell us, how did you transform this space into what we now use?
Well, even before that, when we first got into the office, I was like, the conference room is probably a better space. So we actually we did 5 episodes in the conference room.
You know, we had that remote year, and then we had the hybrid learning, and this was the first school year we actually had everyone back in person. And, you know, with the more recent visits without the masks, it kind of feels like we're back in 2019, like pre-pandemic times. So it's been really great to be able to go back, and I know the schools are really excited to have us back and to be able to cover the stories that we used to again, and not have the focus be on the pandemic anymore, and back to where they belong, back on the schools and what they're doing.
So from
beautiful lighting in there.
Oh yeah, but it's backlit. So it's uncontrollable. So that's the one thing that I was.
We can't even control the shades here either, so they could just drop on you mid-interview. Yeah,
I think I probably have some footage of that. But so eventually we moved into here, which is a little bit more controlled. I put up some soundproofing. I did some lighting stuff, and some of the stuff evolved along the way. And then, you know, we kind of got to the setup that we're at right now, which has stuff all over. There's a light up here. I have a backlight behind me.
We've got cameras hanging off the wall.
Yeah.
We've got control boards. We've got the background, the whole nine. So you did an incredible job. And obviously, I think that recording in person has made our content so much better, not just in terms of obviously the video quality, right, and the what you can see and what we can do, but also, I mean, it's just easier to talk to someone in person when I'm looking across the table at you as opposed to when I'm looking through the screen. I mean,
well, even across the table was a thing that I picked up along the way, because at first we would have a side by side, and then I noticed, I'm like, this is like a weird camera angle when I'm turning and shifting.
Yeah.
Then I tried to do it at like a right angle, and it evolved into straight on, which is essentially what a lot of the major podcasts do with a straight on conversation kind of thing. So
yeah, and so I think that has just really taken this podcast to the next level. And so while we're talking about all the work that you did to make this space what it is, I just want to say, like, you, and you mentioned this earlier, you are the technical guy here, right? You are doing all of that stuff. I'm kind of like I'll come up with the outlines and what are we talking about and the content, and then I will come on and host and talk to the reporters. But everything else is you.
Well, don't undersell what you do, because literally I have nothing to do with it before
right. And
so I just pick it up, and it's like, okay, this is what I have.
I guess that's true. Yeah. So I do the pre-planning. We kind of collab on the recording with me as the talent and you behind the and
then you
the
run
camera.
as far away.
And then and then I leave you to do your thing. So tell us a little bit about the editing process, because like you said, you've made this into a lot more of a visual experience than it was initially. You've got new intro, you've got, different cuts during the thing. And so talk to us about what that's like.
Generally, it'll be about like a 3-hour process of turning whatever we do into something that's visually appealing. I actually am proud because someone wrote on the YouTube one time, I take out the filler words. Mm-hmm. So likes, and someone noticed, and they're like, thank you. And I was like, oh my goodness, that means so much to me, because it means that like someone is taking it. But if you're listening, you don't hear it. And that's kind of the intention is you don't want the viewer thinking about it. So that's, what I go into it thinking. I try to make it like a little bit more like a TV presentation, and I do a lot of the stuff to practice for some of the bigger projects. So like sometimes this might not get the most views or whatever, but I'm practicing for the future that might be, the big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you, again, I know I said it at the top there, but you have been incredible in what you do and in that aspect, because that is not my talent. That is not what I am here to do. And so I really appreciate you taking on the technical aspects of all of those things. But let's talk about all of the podcasts that we've done throughout the years. I know we've talked about maybe showing a little compilation at some point here of various things, but I wanted to talk about what are some of your favorite podcasts that we've done throughout the years. And I have a couple of my own, but if you want to start, feel free.
I'm trying to see. So I actually have a list here of everything. I actually made a tally, because we made a joke. We had an inside joke that it's the From the Scene podcast with Tom.
Yeah, there was a lot of Tom in recent years, in the past year or so.
But Tom is actually tied.
Oh.
So Tom appeared 10 times. So did Paul.
Wow.
Which is interesting because
is interesting.
Because we did mention that Paul is kind of the problem child when it comes to this stuff.
You know what's funny?
And we just compounded the problem by having him.
But Paul was great every time we did. And the funny thing is that Paul, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that. And I think the reason I wouldn't have thought that is that Paul is on a lot of the episodes where we interview multiple people.
Yes.
And so that first episode where it was him and Kyle, and then the Sandy episode, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, was him and a bunch of other reporters. So there's a few that have Paul on it, but there are also other people in different respects. I think also a Parade one also had Paul and another reporter. So that's interesting. He was in on a lot of it. Whereas Robleski, I think, is primarily just me and him. There might be one or two others where he was in with another guest, but mostly it's just me and him when he's on. So
if you really want the tallies, I know I didn't release this information to you. Paul and Tom are the only ones in double digits. They're at 10. You had Ostapuk on for 7.
Okay.
You had Annalise on for 7. And I guess Kristen was the only other one at 5. So everyone else was under.
Oh, wow. Kristen sneaking into the top 5 hasn't even been here in a bit.
Exactly.
That's pretty impressive.
She laid down the groundwork.
Yeah, she really did. She's holding down the fort. But yeah, so I want to talk. Let me start with just a couple of my favorite ones, because, and I actually just mentioned this one when I was talking about Paul, which was the Hurricane Sandy Anniversary podcast. That's honestly, I think, one of the best pieces of content that we've created, just in terms of the depth that there was to it. So just, I guess, to give a little recap, this was the 10-year anniversary of Hurricane Sandy in 2022. And we decided, hey, this is a big deal. This was a major event on Staten Island that claimed numerous lives and destroyed houses and all of these huge impacts that we still are really felt to this day. And so I was like, wow, we really, when this happened, had so many people on staff that are still here and can speak to those experiences.
Well, we didn't have so many. We had 4.
Well, there were other people who were still here, but
there wasn't many.
Yeah,
because I thought about it when we were trying to get people on. We were like, who else was here? And then they either moved up into management.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, there were some people who were here, but then in management roles or whatever it might have been.
I think Mark Stein was just starting, right?
Yeah,
he was just out of college.
It was early on for him. Yeah, we had Mark on, we had Tracy on, we had Paul, and then we had Joe as well.
You couldn't fathom what happened, and as journalists, that adrenaline kicks in and you just start reporting.
I get down there, pull over, and there's tons of people walking around. You could see debris everywhere. There's maybe a fire truck, firemen, everything's wet, it's still windy out, there's overcast. It just feels like, not for cliche, it feels like a horror movie, a thriller, some sort of dystopian disaster flick.
I eventually lost contact with my parents. So I was kind of scrambling, through any kind of means of contact I could think of. I know you mentioned earlier that our colleague Tracy was sort of taking phone calls from people, looking for information, and I was one of those people. And it was just like a really desperate, really, trying night.
I do remember looking out the front window of my living room and seeing the trees, which I was seeing bend in ways I'd never seen bend before, and then obviously the aftermath of it. I remember riding my bike around my neighborhood for a little bit and just seeing the complete devastation. And then I later volunteered at New Dorp High School, handing out some supplies and stuff and going around the neighborhood. And those images, I think, those are ones that'll definitely stick with me.
So the thing I thought was so cool is that, one, it's probably our longest episode. It's about an hour. We have 4 different people, and we kind of break it up into segments where we're talking to Mark about reporting from the scene of the storm. They literally had him out there in the storm writing and reporting back to the office. And then Tracy was in the office taking the calls, writing the articles, scrambling, doing all those things. Paul was disconnected from his parents at the time, who lived in Midland Beach, which was one of those areas that was super affected by it. So we're talking about his experiences of not being able to contact his family and the worry and the fear and that sort of thing. And then Joe, who was doing...
Joe was like riding a bike or something.
Well, he was riding a bike through the storm. But Joe, we had on to talk about like the resiliency aspects of it and like forward-facing things, because he was our climate reporter at the time. So we talked about, okay, what do we need to do to prepare for these types of storms in the future? So I really just love that podcast because we hit it from so many different angles. Yep. It was a huge story that still resonates, I think, with so many people throughout the borough. So if I had to pick one podcast, I'm definitely going with that one.
It's always going to be the ones that are collaborative, because I think it gives it multiple perspectives of the same kind of thing. So that was definitely impactful. I thought of one that we just did recently with the kids.
We here at The Advance run this high school mentorship program where we bring in high school students from various high schools around the borough who are interested in journalism, and we mentor them and help them get work published in our paper. So I thought that was really cool. It's a great program that we've been doing for a couple of years now. We're expanding on each year, which I think is just really great. A lot of them are Curtis students. I went to Curtis. They worked right for the Curtis log. I had an article or 2 in the Curtis log back in the day.
Just 2?
Yeah, I didn't. It wasn't a full-time gig. I'll tell you that.
You didn't talk about traffic?
No, I wasn't writing about traffic. I wasn't writing about zoning proposal.
I feel like if I have like an outlet to give people a voice and to get a story out there that people might not know of, I feel like that drowns out ignorance, I feel, because like if you're informed on a situation, you're more empathetic and outspoken about it.
I think I'm definitely very excited to be able to have that wider audience. I think that also puts more responsibility on me to be able to portray the event in a great light, to do it justice, I think, and to be able to show to the community that this is sort of what's going on here and what's going on there, and to be able to spread awareness about that.
But yeah, so that high school episode, again, one of my favorite ones. And like you said, the ability to have on different perspectives. So we had multiple students who came on to the mic and talked to us about kind of why they wanted to get into journalism, what it means to them, what it means to get published and see your article on our website or in the paper and those types of things. And truly, like, I know you work with teens in some capacity because you coach track, right? Yep. And things like that. I don't really do that frequently, but it really is in some ways encouraging and inspiring. I was like, wow, the kids are all right. Like they were so smart. They were so passionate. They were incredible. Speakers. They were great. They were so good at it. And they really cared about doing real work that helped their community, and they were so passionate about all of these different things that they wanted to write about, advocate for, inform people about. And so like things like that really do warm my heart. And on top of that, of it being like a feel-good thing, I just thought it was a good piece of content. Like, absolutely. I thought they were great, and I thought that it was one of our better podcasts.
It was also a thing like where, to me, like from the recording standpoint, when I'm talking to them and they're like, oh, I don't know if I'm good on the mic, and then the thing comes on and they're like, they don't even stutter.
Yeah.
I'm like, whoa, where'd that come from? Like, that's bad? You know?
No, they were great. And so it's funny when you talk about, like, some people don't like to hear themselves on a mic, or some people. Yeah, and so.
I'm going to change my voice. I'm going to sound like the voice of God in Hard Knocks.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. But, and so I'm just kind of curious, what have you heard from people about the podcast, if anything? Because I know in my experience, like, I've just been out and about. Sometimes I'll be talking to a local elected official for an interview for a story, and he'll just mention like, oh, by the way, I heard the recent podcast. Like, that was pretty cool. Like, that was good. Like, so we've got people like that listening. Or then I'll be out at a bar. One of my friends from high school.
Recognized?
Yeah, no, well, these are like my friends, like people I've known from high school or whatever. And they're like, hey, dude, I saw your podcast thing and the video clip on Facebook, and I was watching it, and you're so good. And like my girlfriend's parents brought it up to me the other day. They were like, wow, I didn't know he was so good at that. And I was like, yeah, thanks. That's what I do for a living. Yeah. But it's just, it's nice though. It feels good when you hear that, you know, people are listening or people are watching and they think that you're doing a good job. So I was just curious if you've had any of your own experiences with that.
I mean, people, so again, because I'm not front facing, it's like, it's hard to get them to like bring it up to me.
Yeah, that's true.
I know people will recognize some of the people because they've appeared on the podcast or on social. And I know whenever we had Pam on, like restaurateurs would call her and be like, oh my goodness, bring me up next time.
That's cool.
And, she's like a memory bank she remembers everything.
Alfonso's has been at 1899 Victory Boulevard since 1978. The business actually was started by the dad, Alfonso Campitiello, in 1970. He was from Salerno, Italy. He came to Brooklyn, worked bakeries around Brooklyn, really learned the craft. And then he became the executive pastry chef at the Plaza Hotel. And from that, learned about, Franco-American cooking and rather pastry. And then he went on to the Essex House, and then he started his own business. That bakery is a very complex one because they make so many items every single day. I mean, it's always a full inventory. The food always looks so beautiful and fresh. And it's actually a little bit of an art, in terms of the chemistry of it all and just making sure there's safe food handling. So they do a pretty remarkable job considering the breadth of product that they put out there.
It's insane. Yeah,
you're coming up on your 34th anniversary today.
You could name any restaurant on the island. She'll give you the exact address down to the zip codes. It really is.
Like, I mean, she could tell there's staff in the kitchen.
Yeah, how much the appetizers cost. Like, it really is. And honestly, while we're still just circling back a little bit, some of my favorite podcast stuff, the podcasts we did with Pam were some of my favorite to record personally because I just love to talk about food. I love to talk about like local Staten Island restaurants and all of that kind of stuff. So those were great, but
also because she is such an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to those things that you can throw her a curveball and she'll be fine.
It makes my job so much easier.
Like you used to do the Staten Island trivia thing or whatever.
Yeah,
you know? And like we could have just cut to Pam.
Yeah.
Give me something, Pam. Like,
yeah, absolutely. But it's funny what you mentioned, though, about in terms of the feedback, because you are, as you said, like your face isn't the one on this. So like people will say to me like, oh, I saw his face pop up on my Facebook.
Right.
So I clicked and watched a little bit and like it
I'm
was
making
good.
You famous.
Right. But for you, it's things like when people comment and say, thank you for removing the or things like that, you're still getting recognized for the work that you're doing on that. But it's just they don't know that you're the one that they're complimenting.
It's what it is. It's like when I go to a party, like, but now it's like when I go to a party, I somehow don't want to be part of the party anymore. I just want to like record it.
Right.
So they're like, you want me to take a picture of you? I'm like, no, not really. I'm fine.
That's funny. Yeah, so before we go here and wrap things up, I just want to tell our listeners a little bit about the future of podcasting at the Staten Island Advance, SILive.com, whatever you'd like to call us. So as we mentioned, this will be our last episode of From the Scene. We're winding this down, but that does not mean that we are abandoning podcasting. It will be a little bit of a break. There's going to be, I'm not sure that I should put a timetable on this from what our bosses have been telling us because we don't know exactly.
We're pivoting somewhere.
When we'll be back, but we are pivoting. And so instead of this format where we have had this show where I bring on reporters from the newsroom to talk about their stories that they had already reported on, we are now shifting to, I guess the best way to put it is like a special project type thing. So we will have one umbrella name for the podcast, and then we will kind of do seasons that focus on one topic with multiple episodes. So instead, like with From the Scene, 1 week I could be talking about turkeys, and the next it's congestion pricing, and after that it's restaurants, and then it's the ferry. That's not going to be the case with this upcoming thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to have one specific topic where there will be maybe 6 to 10 episodes on that topic. And instead of it just being us talking about reporting that we've already done, the podcast is actually going to be part of the active reporting.
Right.
And so instead of just interviewing with reporters and then cutting to little sound bites, we're going to try and be interviewing people from the community, whether that is just an average resident, whether that is an elected official, whether that is someone who works at a Staten Island institution or something like that. And so you're going to see a pretty significant change in the way that the podcast is formatted and the way that is going to be rolled out and to be honest with you, I can't share that because I don't know that yet in terms of how regularly it will be or what the name will be or, you know, how many episodes or whatever that is. Things are still a little bit up in the air, but I did just want to let people know that we are not disappearing. You didn't build this studio for nothing, Jason. Right. We are still going to use this studio. So be on the lookout for that. It could be months. It could be start of next year. We really don't know. So, but we definitely will be back to you at some point.
We're evolving just like the industry's evolving, and we're just trying to figure it out. So a lot of this stuff, you know, we've kind of nurtured through, and we've pivoted when we needed to pivot. I got a lot of practice in, so, you know, we're making things better. I'm constantly evolving. I'm probably going to be doing the same thing on paternity leave and practicing acoustics and playing with light sticks and all this stuff because I can't turn it off. So yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. And, you know, before we go, I just want to really, really thank our listeners who have been here with us.
You can look at them.
Whether you've listened to one podcast or all of them, I really do just appreciate everything and you kind of engaging in our content and being so kind and supportive of us. And it meant a lot to me. It really did. I mean, a lot of people in my life have been asking me since I told them that we're kind of winding this down and we're shifting and whatever, like, oh, well, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, it's sad. Like this, like you said earlier, this was kind of my baby. Like I started this. I had been pushing for it for years. I finally got it approved. It was this thing. And then we made it better and we kept going and we've produced so much cool stuff out of it that like it is sad for me. But at the same time, I'm excited about what's next. And also, I told people this too. 3 years is a decent run for a show. I mean, yeah. Like, whether it's,
what, we have 72 episodes or something?
Yeah, I think it's, 75, 76, something like that. Yeah. But so, you know, whether it's a podcast, a TV show, a radio show, whatever it may be, 3 years is a pretty good run. So I feel good about that, but I will be sad to let it go.
Yeah, but I mean, that's probably a good time to like, cue up the sad montage that I'll probably put together. I'll try to make it as sad as possible.
I can't wait to see it.
Of like all the guests and all the things. Maybe it'll just be maybe I'll have like Paul clicking a pen in the background. Just
got like the in the arms.
I'll compile all the ums and likes and just throw them all in.
Exactly. All those ums that you had edited out throughout the years, we're just going to dump them into one big and then you can guess which reporter was which
But how about this? Before we get to that, why don't we throw it back? Because I know like you did this right in the beginning and then somehow you kind of lost it. You used to do a thing right at the end of the podcast. It's like, did you know? Did you prepare one?
I did not. So let's not do. You did tell me that, and we did not have anything left. You know what it is? We had a document that I have been using of all these cool Staten Island facts, and I kind of ran out.
How many things did you prepare?
For what?
Like how many of those did you have at that point?
Oh, there was a bunch on there, but I used. No, I did not have. Or maybe I didn't. I didn't have 77. No, we didn't. So we don't have that. But I we're going out the way we came in. But I mean, I guess that's it. Thank you again, Jason, for everything that you've done to make this podcast what it is, and I'm really excited to get going on our next venture.
Sounds good.
Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. We're grateful to have had this opportunity and look forward to chatting with you again soon. Thank you for supporting local journalism.